Can I sufficiently build the curated questions business to transition by 1 October? Quoting the children's book, The Little Engine That Could, and saying, I think I can, gave little solace to my wife, who has grown accustomed to having food on the table and the water bill paid. Strange. She's funny that way. Albert Einstein said, don't think about why you question, simply don't stop questioning. Welcome to Curated Questions. I am your host, Ken Woodward. And these questions are not mathematical equations, but rather a resource to encounter personal reflection and growth. As Tupac Shakur stated, even the genius asks questions. Now, let's engage the questioning community. Greetings, Ken Woodward here, and welcome back to another episode of Curated Questions. Together, we engage inquisitive humans about how they use questions to navigate and make sense of our world. I'm a fellow traveler and pilgrim on this journey, and I'm glad you're here. This episode was not on my bingo card. I will weigh the risks and rewards of answering the question, will you resign? I will recount the scene of receiving an email from my employer and work through the feelings, questions, and conversations that ended with the decision 9 days later. I share this journey as a case study of using questions to probe into the corners of a situation and look at it from multiple angles. As with any case study, there are strengths and weaknesses in how the characters get to a solution. As we work together through this intense period, I will pause to ask your input on where I could have gone deeper to mitigate risk or what you would have done differently. Although it wasn't as complex and suspenseful as the 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, when the world stood on the edge of World War III, it felt that way in my life. Author Sebastian Junger recounted how indigenous people warriors would retell the stories of battle to the rest of the tribe after combat as a means of healing, and the rest of the tribe could share in the effects of battlefield traumas to empathize and learn from the experience. Dr. Kurt Thompson, in The Soul of Shame, writes that when we witness others' stories, we can identify similar parts of our own stories and mitigate the power of shame and guilt in our lives. Upheaval is happening globally. Our willingness and ability to be a witness to others can be a salve during these times of significant change. Tuesday afternoon, January 28, 2025, I was on work travel in Oxnard, California, conducting testing for the U.S. Navy. Now, when people think of the military, their minds rightfully go to those in uniform. However, the Department of Defense employs over 950,000 civilians to support the 2+ million troops in uniform. These jobs include shipyards, laboratories, medical fields, airfields, and schools. I have worked in program management and acquisition roles for the last 15 years to deliver systems to the fleet. One of the things that makes work for the federal government different is the oath of office we take when we begin our job. The oath reads, I, state your name, Ken Woodward, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of my office on which I am about to enter. So help me God. Now, I have given this oath twice. The first time in December of 1988, when I joined the United States Navy as a submarine radioman, and again in June of 2009 when I transitioned from Navy support contractor to civil servant. The federal workforce commitment to the oath is primarily devotion to the government's mission. This most often means a lower salary and slower career growth opportunities compared to what can be found in the private sector. Historically, this trade-off has meant greater job security within the government service due to employee protections coupled with a series of checks and balances anytime a new regulation is released. That Tuesday afternoon, I looked forward to retiring in March of 2027 when I turned 57, after further developing the Curated Questions platform to include coaching and speaking during the next 2 years. This retirement was not about hitting the golf course, but more about making a more significant impact full-time. My work is exciting and directly addressed fleet readiness issues the Chief of Naval Operations outlined in her Project 33 navigation plan in preparation for the Davidson Window 2027 threats. My wife is scaling down her small business with an eye to retirement, and our kids are off on their own, making their way in the world. When I returned to my hotel room, I read an email from hr@opm.gov with the subject line, quote, "fork in the road." This email address was new over the previous week, and initial test messages were considered spam. The administration did something we had never experienced before, and that was government-wide email. The email introduced a, quote, "deferred resignation program," offering all 2.3 million employees the option to resign now, go on administrative leave, and retain full pay and benefits through September 30th of 2025. All that was required to accept the offer was to type "resign" before midnight on 6 February, 10 days away. The entire email is on the OPM, or Office of Personnel and Management, website and worth a quick read. I will quote a couple of areas as we work through this scenario. At face value, this is an excellent offer for many employees with the right circumstances. The first questions were, is this legitimate and can it be trusted? The government had never operated with such little detail. Historically, the rollout of any program would include a several-page document explaining the program details, funding appropriation, last workday determination, equipment turn-in date, plan for workload turnover, performance evaluation closeout, legal reviews, options for retirement, in-grade pay increases, security clearance concern. You know, all that stuff you generally scroll past in the user agreement on your way to opening the latest app? Yeah, that's the kind of stuff I was expecting. I understood the new administration was planning to downsize the government workforce, but I expected an evaluation of agency and personnel performance and then a measured reduction. This was shocking, as the entire government workforce learned about it simultaneously, and leadership had no further guidance on how this would be implemented. Pause a moment. How are you feeling? What questions come to your mind? Where does your mind go? And are you seeking safety? I mean, would this have been an adrenaline rush as you raced to send the resignation response? What does it actually feel like in your body? Okay. Now, before I could evaluate the offer, I had to process Pillar 4. The email stated, the reformed federal workforce will be built around 4 pillars: return to office, performance culture, more streamlined and flexible workforce, and enhanced standards of conduct. The detail of Pillar 4 specifically read, the federal workforce should be comprised of employees who are reliable, loyal, trustworthy, and who strive for excellence in their daily work. Employees will be subject to enhanced standards of suitability and conduct as we move forward. Employees who engage in unlawful behavior or other misconduct will be prioritized for appropriate investigation and discipline, including termination. Most of it was no problem, and I was fully aligned. However, ice formed in my veins and my gut wrenched as I read the combination of loyal, trustworthy, and subject to enhanced standards of suitability and conduct. I had taken my oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, very seriously, whether I was on the clock or not. I questioned what a, quote, enhanced standard regarding loyalty and trustworthiness was. As Steve Bannon predicted, the deluge of executive orders being signed at, quote, muzzle velocity was achieving the desired effect of overwhelm. Russell Vought, now the director of the Office of Management and Budget, delivered in a private speech in 2023 obtained by ProPublica in October of 24. Vaught described his goal of defunding and debasing federal bureaucracies under a potential second Trump administration. He said, quote, "We want to make the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected." He went on to say, "When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. We want to put them in trauma." While not in a policy position, I am a senior GS-14 and near the top of the civilian ranks. Additionally, during 2024, I was part of a part-time workplace-sponsored Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Council representing 80,000 employees. I worked with remarkable people, and we did good work to ensure that deaf and hard of hearing employees had interpreter services and that different sites across the enterprise were getting the resources needed to ensure buildings were ADA compliant. If I had been full-time in such a position, I would have been fired on the first round of executive orders. So what are these new enhanced standards? Are they beyond what my constitutional oath requires? If I don't resign, how bright will the target on my back glow? My leadership has supported all my work, but would termination direction come from higher up the chain of command? These questions could not be resolved that evening. The anxiety of the unknown hit me hard. My gut wrenched, and I was in pain. I considered going to the emergency room, but had recently experienced kidney stones, and this was not as bad, so I held off, hoping sleep would allow for the pain to dissipate. Let's pause just for a moment. So given the circumstances, what would you recommend if we talked over coffee? At this point, what questions would you ask? How would you be listening? How might you use silence? Now, how is this scenario playing out in your body and mind? What is coming to the surface for you? And how might that influence what you're about to say to me as a recommendation? Yeah, pretty heady. Thankfully, the sleep worked. Wednesday, I awoke determined to drive to a decision on February 5th to meet the email deadline on February 6th. I compiled a list of people I needed to talk with that could help me shine a light into my blind spots to ensure I wasn't overlooking an important risk factor. These people either know me well or know details about the options I would pursue if I resigned. Over the next 8 days, I worked full-time, flew back to home near D.C., and had over 24 hours of conversations to drive to a decision. So, let's walk through the primary options. Number 1, do not resign. Continue working at the Washington Navy Yard for the Navy and act like the option was never offered. I would adhere to the back-to-the-office mandate, which means a 12-hour day if the commute is typical and no option for telework. This schedule assumes a slower growth rate trajectory for developing the curated questions, coaching, and speaking aspects in preparation for a 2027 retirement. The questions I explored included the following. What are the chances of my name popping up on a list and getting fired? I thought medium to low for getting fired and walked out of the building. How about the chances of being part of an official reduction in force and early retirement? This was medium to high risk, as I met the qualifications and was given the opportunity a couple of years ago, but wasn't prepared. The downside of this option is that I forfeited the administrative leave time and would need to immediately pick up a contract job. Would the administration make a better offer? Not a chance. Based on Vaught's comments earlier, trauma is the point. I learned from a previous layoff in 2001 that companies are far more generous early on, and the deal never gets better. What do I know about the pending job market? I expected the job market to be flooded with former federal workers with similar experience looking for work. What did I expect the workplace to be like, and did I want to be there as the contractions took place? I expected morale to plummet as anxiety about further cuts and increased workload squeeze my teammates as they seek to meet the threats facing the Navy. Number 2, I could resign. I would take the offer to collect a paycheck for the next 8 months and retire on 1 October. Retirement is defined as a few $1,000s a month and medical insurance. I will work full-time to build curated questions to provide an income equivalent to my current salary. If I do not achieve financial milestones by 1 August, I will pursue a contracting position with the DoD until curated questions stands on its own. The questions I explored include the following. Will the administration pay me through the end of September, or will they renege? President Trump has had a significant history of not paying his contractors, and Elon Musk broke commitments with former Twitter employees when they resigned or were fired. This was my highest risk. My faith was not in leadership, as they might explain defunding those who resigned as scapegoats and unworthy of getting paid. Coworkers rightfully asked who would pay for this resignation program and out of what appropriation. Congress had not authorized this and expected work out of employees to meet the funded requirements. My confidence was in the massive machine of the federal system racing to catch up with how to implement this program. I hoped the very system I was part of would mitigate the risk. Can I sufficiently build the curated questions business to transition by 1 October? Quoting the children's book, The Little Engine That Could, and saying, I think I can, gave little solace to my wife, who has grown accustomed to having food on the table and the water bill paid. Strange. She's funny that way. Former guest Brian Fretwell of Finding Good was confident my coaching certification would be a reliable income source. I caught scheduled podcast guest and speaker Chad Littlefield of We and Me for a 9-minute discussion on his commute home, and he was bullish on getting the speaking business started by the deadline and recommended the book The Thought Leader's Practice by Matt Church as a framework for thinking about the journey. Next up, do I have faith or confidence to step into this future as a sole practitioner and grow curated questions into all I envision? This was the scariest question. Hiding behind what-if excuses is far easier than stepping into the arena. Was this purpose calling? This option allowed me to build an asset that could serve countless others and meet my family's needs. During conversations, I mentioned this path was one that required greater faith and scared me far more. Podcast guest Derek Sivers said he lived much of his life turning towards the things that scared him.
I think just valuing the long-term view and consequences. So if you choose comfort, you get acclimated to comfort, which then makes you weaker, because as you get more acclimated to comfort, you become less and less capable of handling discomfort. And so if I'm thinking long-term, I do not want life to be easier. I want to be stronger. And so I deliberately keep choosing situations that are uncomfortable to keep strengthening myself so that I can be happy in a wider variety of situations. I was going to say any situation, but no, come on. A wider variety of situations. That to me is just obvious and rational. Get stronger instead of weaker. For ongoing blips of discomfort and acclimation over and over again to strengthen yourself instead of just sticking with one that you know. But yeah, you're right. Thanks for reminding me. I have been doing this since I was a teenager. I had a little rule of thumb that says, whatever scares you, go do it. And I live my life by that. Just to change it up, just to keep seeing the world from different perspectives, like we're talking about with questioning. What's another way to see this? What's another way to see this? You can do that with your life choices. Yeah, and you could keep pushing into discomfort, which then gives you the ultimate security of feeling strong and capable. That to me is a greater reward than the short-term reward of comfort.
A Sumner Crenshaw painting that hangs over my desk includes the poem, "Little did I know the precipice would become my home, because these timid wings of mine mean that I have only teetered, never flown." This painting has been a constant companion and both an encouragement and a warning for how I want to live my life. What would I expect the job market to look like at the end of summer if I hadn't developed the income stream to maintain our lifestyle? I projected the market to be poor as further layoffs, firings, and reductions in force efforts would have been in full swing over the summer, and many federal workers would be looking for jobs. I didn't foresee the administration getting a full budget passed and would likely continue with continuing resolutions, slowing hiring in the marketplace. Thankfully, I would need something to gap fill my budget instead of making up the entire budget. So let's take a pause. What is your recommendation? Did it change from your initial recommendation? Where in your body are you feeling the uncertainty? Are you processing this scenario in parallel with your decision as if you had received the email? What additional questions should I have considered? Who else should I have consulted with? How would you have changed any of my risk ratings? Higher risk, lower risk? And no fair using what you know now, having lived to see what has happened since February 5th, 2025. My wife and I crowded around the computer screen that Wednesday night to make a decision. Throughout this journey, she had been hurt and angry. This was not the certainty the federal government had promised, which she had expected and had grown accustomed to, and she felt betrayed. As we pored over details and discussed risk and reward, we reviewed pay stubs and leave balances, and both choices scared us. We both preferred security. But eventually, we pushed back from the computer with a decision. Hey there, Simon Gal. Since you've produced American Idol for all these seasons, what exactly is the correct length of the pregnant pause before making an important announcement? Ouch, I gotta go. The decision was to resign. The process was brutal, but it was done. The weight of the decision lifted, and now I would stride forward confidently into the future on wobbly legs. Breaking this decision into bite-sized pieces, teaming up with others who have had more experience in these areas, and probing the pieces with questions allowed me to calm the chaos that was raging through my head and mitigate the cortisol pumping through my body. I'm curious, what processes would you use in my circumstance, and what would be different? What questions are at the top of your list to get to a decision? Who would be the members of your pantheon that you would counsel with to gain clarity? And apart from the heady analysis, what other key practices would you include in your journey through a similar situation? Additionally, I have learned to keep a serendipity square on my curated questions episode bingo card. I didn't know this one was coming, but didn't want to pass up on the chance to squeeze all the learning we could. Thank you for being part of this journey as we grow the Curated Questions community and resources into all that it can be. We are in tumultuous times, with a boatload of change and pain being inflicted. Please be gracious to those you encounter in real life or online. May your legacy be one of love and care. Gratitude shout out to Beauty Pill for the show's music and producer Ben Ford for the technical help. This episode was recorded on Piscataway land. 2025 is all about letting others know about the Curated Questions resource. Your engagement is what informs the algorithm that this podcast is worth introducing to new folks. Please engage with the episode in some manner. Download, follow, save, like, share, or comment about something that resonates. This action ensures we are engaging the questioning community. Until next time, keep questioning.